So there's an interesting documentary series on Netflix about prisons around the world. Second season came out. I watched the whole thing. Before I get into the cool facts about the different prisons they look at, just talking about the series in general, if you go in expecting, and you might from the title, it's inside the world's toughest prisons, if you go inside expecting something like Oz and very sensationalistic and very graphic and showing all these hardened criminals, you might be a little disappointed. It's much more just showing the diversity and how different the prisons around the world are, and how sometimes it's very bizarre things that you wouldn't expect, and sometimes it's so human and relatable. There's that kind of duality there. So the first prison we go to in Brazil, we see some themes that we're going to see in all the different prisons. The first is immediately the guy that goes into this prisons, the question he asks is, how do you survive in prison? He wants to know prison 101. What do I know as a new people to survive? And immediately you think it's going to be, oh, link up with a gang, don't accept someone if they offer you a favor, all the common things we hear. But what you hear at the prison in Brazil and all around the world, immediately they start talking about hygiene and washing your clothes, washing your dishes, keeping things clean, and you start to get the sense the prison you see here, it won't remind you, if you're from North America and you're exposed to American prisons, this won't remind you of a prison. It's people have kind of free movement. They're not wearing jumpsuits. Everyone's just wearing shorts. It's hot. It's just filled with people just milling around, forming these little independent communities with chores lists and all these ingenious methods they've come up with to keep things clean, because it's tragically underfunded. They don't have the cleaning material, so they have to come up with all these ways to keep things clean, and everyone chips in. It's just fascinating. Everyone's very skinny. I don't know if it's the heat or the food. It's not very good. Even the dog wouldn't eat the food. So just not an image of what you'd expect from a prison at all. And then the bizarre facts you get on conjugal visit, I guess there's a certain day, and everyone, you bring your own mattress. So everyone is going over to the conjugal visit, and every single person is just carrying their mattress because everyone knows what's going on. And then another theme that's interesting is you start to see, sometimes we give Scandinavian countries a hard time. We think they're the only people that have this focus on rehabilitation, and kind of sometimes it seems overemphasis on rehabilitation. But here we saw some of the most fascinating rehabilitation programs I've seen. There was ayahuasca and these kind of traditional ceremonies. People are smearing mud. Prisoners are smearing mud on each other and massaging mud on each other and doing these kind of somewhat dancing, somewhat ceremonial dances, and just really, really interesting. And it's kind of heartening to see that this emphasis on rehabilitation, which I think is the right way to go, isn't just confined to, sometimes you think it's just confined to North America, but is actually hearteningly spreading throughout the world. And then we go to this prison in Ukraine, and immediately it's such a different vibe, whereas before there was all this activity and overpopulation, there were so many people, it was so overcrowded. In Ukraine, it's just like a ghost town. It reminds you of like a gloomy boarding school. There's just so few people. You see this one guy, he's the lumberjack, or he chops the wood, and he's just in this huge area with all this lumber, wood, all these different machines, and it's just him just swinging, chopping one thing of wood at a time. So just very interesting, gloomy vibe. It used to be a gulag, so there's all these carryovers where you wake up at the crack of dawn with just kind of Soviet style anthem just blaring. You go do your drills, your physical calisthenics in the yard in the cold. And it's interesting, there's European inspired reforms now, so now like the work is optional, the drills, which are still done, but now they're optional. So there is this kind of process of modernization. And now we get to, again, each chapter has the bizarre elements. There's the one black guy at the whole jail named Johnny. He's from Cameroon, so happy, so positive, and he would put on these shows where he'd get on stage and he'd dance and sing and just be so happy, and you'd have 8 fairly gloomy Ukrainians just in the audience, but showing some signs of happiness and amusement for the first time. And just interesting, this one guy, kind of how did he get there, who knows, but nonetheless making the experience better for so many people. And then one of the more bizarre and disturbing elements, there's a 65-year-old serial killer who's killed like 30 plus people, just countless women, all women, and he's in jail, but he's met this person, this 25-year-old Elena, and we see them interacting, and they're about to start this 3-day little conjugal visit. They have their own space, and just bizarre, the interviewer, the documentary guy, he's asking, does it bother you that he murdered so savagely these 30 women, as she's nuzzling up against him, this young 25-year-old. So Just bizarre. And then we go to this prison in Papua New Guinea. Now, all the prisons we see very underfunded. This one's probably the worst. No guards, like a handful of guards just keeping tabs on all these different prisoners to the point where they have animals that they use to feed the prisoners, and they don't have the guards to guard the animals, and they're worried the people are gonna come and steal the animals. So they just send prisoners to stand by the animals, which is these massive machetes, just showing how they're just doing their best to just, with the limited resources they have, just keep the place functioning. But it's shocking. It's kept functioning by a few things. One, the solitary confinement there, the kind of deterrent, horrible. The exercise, the 1 hour a day of exercise is at the guard's discretion. So you get the sense that basically means very little exercise, and you don't get fed. The only way you get fed is other prisoners coming and feeding you. So just horrific solitary confinement that I guess as a deterrent keeps people mostly in line. But it's shocking how you have so few guards, so few supervision, all these people who are criminals, but they keep the place running remarkably well. And there's people who have respect and leadership positions, and they make sure things are divided equitably, and people find ways to entertain themselves. And there's this theater group that formed and does shows about police brutality. So just incredible that even when this place just has no funding, just no funding whatsoever, it's not just constant violence and constant people at each other's throats. It's a somewhat functioning community. And then you realize it's not surprising at all. Of course it's going to be that. They're just people, and you put a bunch of people together, you're going to basically see the same things no matter what kinds of people they are or where you are. People are going to find ways to amuse themselves, going to form systems of authority to make sure everything's running smoothly. They're going to find ways to keep things clean, police the people who don't want to keep things clean. So I guess it's not surprising at all. And we get exposed to the nice areas where the people who are politicians, other people with power stay, and it's just the barest of essentials. But you realize how when you're in these kind of conditions, something like a chair, and they just pan around to see just a chair, but that chair, after you've just been so deprived for so long, that chair, and prisoners call it the promised land, and something so bare and ordinary can become such a privileged state of being. And then for the bizarre, we see in Papua New Guinea, there's still belief in sorcery and witchcraft. So you have literal witch hunts where someone will get blamed, a sorcerer or a witch, for deaths in the community. And some of the people that were in the prison, they were on death row for killing a witch because they believed the witch was responsible for all these deaths. Now, last place, we go to Belize. Now, this is the first time you're going to look at it and think it looks kind of like your image of a prison. You see the orange jumpsuits, everyone's working, everyone has a job, things are very regimented, everyone has their own cells, there's a lot of lockdown, a lot of guards. And Belize, they couldn't manage this prison. It was just unmanageable. They couldn't feed the prisoners, so they handed it over to this NGO. And I think it's called the Colby organization. And this NGO, a huge part of their mission is Christianity, 12-step program. So huge part of getting a job, any kind of chance of getting out and getting parole, is fully embracing Christianity. And you even see the loudspeakers when prisoners are in the yard doing work or exercising, just the loudspeakers just constantly blaring out Christian Bible verses, Christian songs. So really, really interesting. And this was the chapter where you saw the most of people just waiting 5 years, 4 years, 6 years to even just get a trial. And you see that juxtaposed with some of these prisoners saying things so earnestly about how they feel like they've changed their life, Christianity's changed their life, they have such faith that they're going to get out of here. And you see that juxtaposed with just such a horrible situation where you have a guy who's waiting 5 years just to have a trial, who knows how long he's going to be waiting. Most likely, unfortunately, he's going to be found guilty, and yet for him to still have faith. And there's always the question, how much of it is genuine, how much of it is him just saying what he knows a judge, the parole board, would want to hear. But nonetheless, it seems genuine, and it's just interesting how people can have faith in just such dire circumstances. And just last thing, talking about how Americanized the last prison in Belize seemed, apparently the Bloods and the Crips have a huge presence there, and I guess a lot of people were deported back to Belize who had gang ties, and now whole wings of the prison are Blood wings and Crip wings. So I don't know if just because they knew it was probably an American audience, they played that aspect up, but it is interesting to see how just, American influence in even prison policy and unfortunately prison gangs can spread throughout the world.